The autumn wind whipped through the parking lot of the Birmingham concert venue in October 2002, as 17-year-old Emma Thompson clutched her backstage pass with trembling hands. Her dark hair hung in her eyes, partly hiding the fresh scars on her wrists that she'd carefully covered with long sleeves and leather bracelets. 6 months ago, in the spring of 2002, she'd been certain she wouldn't live to see this day. 6 months ago, the darkness had been so complete that she couldn't imagine any future at all. But here she was, standing outside Ozzy Osbourne's dressing room, holding a pass she'd won in a radio contest that her therapist had convinced her to enter. "You need something to look forward to," Dr. Martinez had said during one of their sessions. "Something that connects you to the music that's been helping you heal." Emma had rolled her eyes at the time, thinking it was just another one of her therapist's well-meaning but ultimately futile attempts to drag her back into the world of the living. But she'd called in anyway, never believing she'd actually win. The contest had been on Rock 101.5, the local station that had become Emma's lifeline during the worst months of her depression. She'd discovered it late one night when she couldn't sleep, when the thoughts in her head were too loud and too dark to bear alone. The DJ had been playing Black Sabbath's Planet Caravan, and something about the haunting melody had cut through her despair like a blade of light through thick curtains. If you're finding this story meaningful, please consider leaving a like to show your support for stories about mental health awareness and the healing power of music. The security guard knocked on the door and announced Emma's arrival. From inside came that familiar, gravelly voice, the same voice that had sung her through countless sleepless nights when the world felt too heavy to bear. "Come in, love." Emma pushed open the door with a shaking hand and stepped into a surprisingly modest dressing room. She'd expected something grandiose, rock star extravagant, but instead found a space that felt almost cozy. Ozzy Osbourne sat on a worn leather couch, looking smaller than he appeared on stage, but somehow more real, more human. He wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, his famous cross necklaces catching the light from the overhead bulbs. When he looked up and saw Emma, his face immediately softened with genuine warmth. "Well, hello there, darling," Ozzy said, standing up and extending his hand. His accent was thick, comforting in its familiarity from countless interviews she'd watched on MTV. "You must be Emma. Come in, sit down. You look like you could use a cup of tea or something to calm the nerves." Emma shook Ozzy's hand, amazed at how normal it felt, how real. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during her recovery, but she'd never pictured Ozzy being so gentle, so genuinely caring. His hands were calloused from decades of playing, scarred from years of living hard, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Thank you so much for this," Emma managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Oh, I think I might have some idea," Ozzy replied gently, settling back onto the couch and gesturing for Emma to join him. "The radio station told me a bit about your story when they set this up. You've been through some rough times, haven't you, love?" Emma nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of everything she'd been carrying. The months of therapy, the concerned looks from her parents, the careful monitoring by teachers and friends who'd been told to watch for warning signs. She'd planned what she wanted to say, had rehearsed it in her mind during the 3-hour drive to Birmingham, with her mother waiting nervously in the parking lot. But now, sitting here with her musical hero, the carefully planned words seemed inadequate. The room around them was filled with the detritus of rock and roll life, empty water bottles, crumpled set lists, a half-eaten sandwich on a paper plate. There was something beautifully human about it all, something that made Ozzy seem less like an untouchable icon and more like someone who might actually understand what she'd been through. "I wanted to tell you something," Emma began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Black Sabbath, your music, it literally saved my life. When I was at my lowest point, when I couldn't see any reason to keep going, your songs were the only thing that made sense. They were the only thing that understood how I felt." Ozzy's expression grew serious, his eyes focusing intently on Emma's face. In decades of meeting fans, he'd heard many stories, but there was something in this young woman's voice that cut straight to his heart. Perhaps it was the raw honesty, or maybe it was the way she spoke about his music not as entertainment, but as medicine. "Last winter, I was planning to end everything," Emma continued, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The words came easier now, perhaps because she'd said them so many times in therapy. Or perhaps because Ozzy's presence somehow made confession feel safe. I had it all figured out. I'd written letters to my parents, to my little brother. I'd even picked out what I wanted to wear. She paused, remembering that terrible night when the world had felt so small and so hopeless that death seemed like the only escape. But the night I was going to do it, I put on Into the Void one last time. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to hear something beautiful before everything ended. And something about that song, about the way it captures that feeling of being lost in darkness, but still fighting. It made me realize I wasn't alone, that someone else had felt this way and had found a way to turn that pain into something beautiful. Ozzy was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in front of him. Emma worried she'd said too much, that she'd made things uncomfortable. She'd learned during her recovery that people often didn't know how to respond to such raw honesty about mental illness. But when Ozzy finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "You know, Emma," Ozzy said slowly, his voice carrying the weight of years, "when we were writing those early Sabbath songs back in the late 60s and early 70s, we were just a bunch of working-class kids from Birmingham, trying to make sense of a world that seemed pretty dark and hopeless. We were writing about war, about pollution, about feeling powerless and angry and scared. Now here we are in 2002, and our music is still reaching people like you, decades later, helping them through their darkest moments." He paused, looking directly into Emma's eyes, with an intensity that made her feel truly seen for the first time in months. "But I'm so bloody grateful that it did. Music saved my life too, you know. More times than I can count. The bottles, the drugs, the times when I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. Music was what pulled me back from the edge. And knowing that our music helped save yours, well, that makes every struggle, every crazy moment of this career worth it." Emma felt tears starting to form, but for the first time in months, they weren't tears of sadness. The lyrics in Children of the Grave about fighting for peace and love, they helped me understand that my fight wasn't supposed to be against myself. It was supposed to be for something better, for a future I couldn't see yet, but that might be worth living for. "That's exactly right, darling," Ozzy said, leaning forward with sudden intensity. "The darkness you've been through, the pain you've experienced, that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something that makes you understand life in a way that not everyone can. You've been to the edge, and you've chosen to come back. That takes incredible strength." Ozzy stood up and walked over to a guitar case in the corner of the room. Emma noticed the way he moved. There was still something of the showman in his gait, but also a weariness that spoke to his own battles with demons, both literal and metaphorical. "I want to show you something," he said, pulling out a battered acoustic guitar. The instrument was clearly old, its wood worn smooth by countless hands and performances. "This old thing has been with me through some of my darkest times. Through rehab, through the worst days of my addiction, through nights when I thought I'd never see another sunrise. Would you like me to play something for you?" Emma nodded, hardly believing what was happening. She'd dreamed of hearing Ozzy play up close, but she'd never imagined it would be in circumstances like these, intimate and raw and real. Ozzy sat back down and began to play a gentle, haunting melody that Emma didn't recognize. His fingers moved across the strings with practiced ease, but there was something vulnerable about the way he played, as if the guitar were a confessional and the music his prayer. After a few bars, Ozzy began to sing, his voice softer and more vulnerable than Emma had ever heard it. The song was about struggle, about finding light in darkness, about the choice to keep living when everything seems hopeless. It wasn't a Black Sabbath song or a solo hit. It seemed like something deeply personal, something Ozzy might have written during his own battles with addiction and depression. The lyrics spoke of midnight terrors, of waking up in cold sweats, of the gradual journey back to sanity and hope. "I've never recorded that one," Ozzy said when he finished, setting the guitar gently against the couch. "Too personal, maybe, too close to the bone, but I think you understand what it means." "That was beautiful," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for sharing it with me. It felt like you were singing about things I've felt, but could never put into words." Ozzy set the guitar aside and looked at Emma with the kind of paternal concern that the teenager hadn't felt in years. Her own father, loving but bewildered by his daughter's depression, had struggled to know how to help. But there was something in Ozzy's gaze that spoke of hard-won understanding, of someone who had walked through similar fires and emerged scarred, but alive. "Can I ask you something, love? Are you getting help? Talking to someone professionally?" "Yeah, I have a therapist, Dr. Martinez. She's actually the one who encouraged me to enter this contest. She said I needed something to look forward to, something that connected me to the things that brought me joy." Emma managed a small smile. She was right. This is the first time in months that I've felt excited about anything. "Good. That's very good." Ozzy nodded approvingly. "Depression is a real illness, Emma. It's not a weakness. It's not something you can just get over. And it's definitely not your fault. But it is something you can learn to manage, something you can fight. And you're clearly a fighter, or you wouldn't be sitting here with me right now." Emma felt something shift inside her. A piece of shame she'd been carrying finally starting to dissolve. Hearing those words from someone she'd looked up to for so long, someone whose music had literally kept her alive, meant more than she could express. It was validation from someone who truly understood the darkness she'd been fighting. "I brought something for you," Emma said, reaching into her worn backpack. She pulled out a composition notebook, its black and white cover marked with doodles and song titles. The pages inside were filled with her handwritten lyrics and fragments of melodies, the product of late-night sessions when sleep wouldn't come, and the only way to quiet her mind was to pour her thoughts onto paper. "I've been writing songs," she continued, offering the notebook to Ozzy with trembling hands, "about everything I've been through. I know they're probably not very good, but my therapist said that creating something from my pain might help me heal. And maybe someday they could help someone else the way your songs helped me." "May I?" Ozzy asked, taking the notebook with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy texts. He flipped through the pages slowly, reading quietly, his expression growing more impressed with each page. Emma watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of polite dismissal or patronizing encouragement. Instead, she saw genuine interest, real engagement with her words. "Emma, these are remarkable," Ozzy said after several minutes of reading. "Really remarkable. You've got a real gift for putting pain into words, for finding beauty in darkness. This line here," he pointed to a particular passage, "the silence screams louder than my voice, but I'm learning to whisper back. That's profound, love. That's the kind of honesty that makes great music." Emma felt her heart racing with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "You really think so? You're not just being nice." "I never just say things to be nice, darling. Ask anyone who's worked with me." Ozzy chuckled, but his expression remained serious. "These lyrics show real talent, real understanding of what it means to transform suffering into art. Have you shown these to anyone else?" "Just my therapist. And my mum knows I write, but she's too worried to read them. She thinks they might be triggering, that they might make me worse instead of better." "Well, they might be triggering in the best possible way," Ozzy said with a gentle smile. "Sometimes we need to be triggered to heal, to grow, to create something meaningful from our experiences. Art has always been about taking the things that hurt us and making them into something that can heal others." He continued reading, occasionally nodding or making appreciative sounds. This one about the hospital, white walls and worried faces, counting the days until I'm safe to be alone. That's powerful stuff. You're not just writing about depression, you're writing about the whole experience, the treatment, the recovery, the fear in other people's eyes. Emma nodded, remembering the week she'd spent in the psychiatric ward after her suicide attempt. That was the hardest part, actually. Not the depression itself, but seeing how scared everyone was of me. Like I was broken in a way that might be contagious. "But you're not broken, are you?" Ozzy asked gently. "You're just temporarily out of tune. And that's something that can be fixed, with time and patience, and the right kind of help." He closed the notebook and looked at Emma seriously. "I want to make you a promise, Emma. I want you to keep writing, keep creating, keep turning your pain into art. And I want you to promise me that you'll keep fighting, that you'll keep choosing life, even on the days when it's hard, especially on the days when it's hard." "I promise," Emma said, and for the first time in months, she meant it completely. The word felt solid in her mouth, real in a way that the empty reassurances she'd been giving her parents and therapist had never felt. Good. Ozzy reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of paper, scribbling something quickly. I'm going to give you my personal email address. Not my manager's, not my publicist's. Mine. I want you to send me your songs when you finish them. I want to hear how you're doing, how your recovery is going. And if you ever find yourself in that dark place again, you reach out to me, day or night. I mean that. Emma took the paper with shaking hands, hardly believing what she was hearing. You would do that? Really? Darling, you reminded me tonight why I started making music in the first place. It wasn't for the fame or the money or the crazy stories people tell about me. It was to connect with people, to let them know they're not alone in their struggles. If my music helped save your life, then your life is precious to me. Your story matters to me. There was a knock on the door, and a voice called out that it was time for Ozzy to head to the stage. The moment Emma had been dreading, the end of this incredible encounter, had arrived. She felt a familiar panic rising in her chest, the fear of being alone again with her thoughts. "Wait," Ozzy said, seeming to sense her distress. He stood up and walked over to his guitar case again, rummaging through a collection of picks, straps, and other musical paraphernalia. He pulled out a black leather wristband, studded with silver, worn soft by years of wear. "This has been with me for over 20 years, he said, holding it up so Emma could see the intricate metalwork. Through rehab, through family crises, through every dark night of the soul I've ever had. Sharon bought it for me when I got clean the first time, said it was armor against the darkness. I want you to have it." Emma looked at the wristband in amazement, recognizing it from countless photos and concert footage. "I can't take this. It's too important. It's part of your history." "That's exactly why you should have it," Ozzy replied, fastening it around Emma's wrist, right over the scars that had begun to fade under months of healing. The leather was warm from his touch, and Emma could feel the weight of its history, the protective power it had held for him through his own battles. "Consider it a reminder," Ozzy continued, his voice gentle but firm. "When things get dark, when the noise in your head gets too loud, remember this conversation. Remember that your story isn't over. Remember that someone believes in you, someone who's been where you are and made it through to the other side." As they walked toward the door, Ozzy put his arm around Emma's shoulders in a gesture that was both fatherly and protective. She could smell his cologne, mixed with the lingering scent of cigarettes and the indefinable aroma of rock and roll, leather and sweat and music and life. "You know what the most metal thing you can do is, Emma? What? Keep living, keep fighting, keep creating. Turn your scars into songs and your pain into power. That's what real strength looks like. Not the fake macho bullshit people think is tough. The real courage to face each day when everything in you wants to give up." Emma nodded, tears flowing freely now, but they were tears of gratitude, of hope, of possibility. For the first time in months, she felt like she had a future worth fighting for. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "For everything. For the music, for tonight, for caring about a stranger, for seeing me as more than just my illness. You're not a stranger, love. You're family. Anyone who's felt what we've felt, who's fought what we've fought, they're family." Ozzy gave her one final hug, and Emma could feel his genuine care in the embrace. "Now get out there and show the world what you're made of." As Emma walked back toward the parking lot where her mother was waiting, she could hear the opening chords of Iron Man beginning on stage behind her. The crowd's roar was deafening, but somehow it didn't feel overwhelming anymore. Instead, it felt like a celebration, like the sound of people coming together to be lifted up by music. Her mother, who had been pacing nervously by their car, took one look at Emma's face and broke into tears of relief. "How did it go, honey? You look different, better." "It was perfect, Mom. Everything's going to be perfect." Emma held up her notebook and showed her mother the email address Ozzy had given her. "He wants to hear my songs. He thinks I have real talent." "Of course you do, sweetheart. I've always known that." Her mother hugged her tightly, and for the first time in months, Emma didn't feel like she was being held together by someone else's worry. Instead, she felt supported, loved, believed in. That night, driving home through the quiet streets of suburban Birmingham, Emma held Ozzy's wristband and started composing a new song in her head. It was about gratitude, about second chances, about the unexpected angels who appear just when you need them most. and for the first time since her depression had begun, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow. The radio in the car was playing Black Sabbath's Changes, and Emma found herself singing along, her voice harmonizing with Ozzy's recorded vocals. Her mother glanced at her in the rearview mirror and smiled, recognizing something in her daughter that had been missing for far too long. 6 months later, in spring 2003, Emma would send Ozzy a demo recording of her songs, professionally recorded with the help of a local studio owner who had heard about her story. A year later, in 2004, she would be invited to open for Ozzy at a small venue in Birmingham, playing her own compositions for a crowd that included several other young people struggling with mental health issues. 5 years later, in 2007, her own band would be touring internationally, playing music that helped other young women through their darkest moments. She would start a foundation for teen mental health awareness, using her platform to destigmatize depression and promote the healing power of creative expression. But that night, in October 2002, driving home with her mother through the quiet streets of suburban Birmingham, Emma simply held Ozzy's wristband and remembered what it felt like to believe in the future again. The darkness wasn't gone. She understood now that it might never be completely gone, but it no longer had power over her. Music had saved her life. A conversation with her hero had given her purpose, and the scars on her wrists, now covered by leather and silver, had become symbols not of her pain, but of her survival. In her notebook that night, Emma wrote, "Sometimes the people who save your life are strangers who understand your darkness because they've lived in it too. Sometimes salvation comes with a Birmingham accent and hands that have played a million chords. Sometimes hope arrives backstage, wearing black leather and carrying 40 years of hard-won wisdom. And sometimes the most important conversation of your life happens in a dressing room that smells like cigarettes and dreams." The next morning, Emma woke up and chose life again. And the morning after that, and every morning since, mental health struggles are real. And if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out for help. Music can heal, human connection can save lives, and your story isn't over yet. If this story touched you, please consider leaving a like and sharing it with someone who might need to hear this message of hope. You are not alone, and your life has value beyond measure.